Hello, this is Putin's daughter calling the red lettuce and Kayla Pop. Are you there? Are you there?
Hello.
Hello, tovarish. Как дела?
Привет, здравствуйте, мой друг.
So, hi,
Shabbat
welcome
shalom.
back. Oh, Shabbat. Oh, we got a Jew in here.
Don't tell the Banderites. Don't tell the Banderites.
Don't tell the Azov. Don't tell the Azov.
Don't tell the Azov Battalion that. Oh no.
Don't tell the Azov Battalion that Zelensky is Jewish. They won't know what to do.
They like him in spite of it, not because of it. In spite of it.
I feel like the Ukrainian neo-fascists or neo-Nazi people, especially the ones with guns, they remind me of American neo-Nazis and neo-fascists. They just love the aesthetic of it and they hate immigrants. They don't care about Jews anymore. They hate immigrants and they love American weapons and yeah, I think that's it.
They definitely target more like the Roma, the people from the Caucasian Mountains, the Caucasus. I call it Caucasia, but the Caucasus Mountains. They hate immigrants, the African immigrants. There's a lot of African immigrants in Ukraine. I remember when I was taking a cab in Kiev, my cab driver was from Sudan and he was speaking Russian, and I was like, yo. I'm talking to a guy from Sudan in Russian. What is life?
Cool. Well, yeah, we should talk about what's going on in Ukraine, how this even began.
So, Kayla, why would the US want to influence Ukrainian politics and install a puppet government in Ukraine?
So I know that we were going to talk about 2014, but I think it might be important to mention all the way up to the breakup of the Soviet Union. And that was the US's greatest accomplishment, its greatest mission is supporting the counter-revolution, because that's what it was. It wasn't something that was a popular uprising that people in any of the 16 republics wanted. This was something that was a coup facilitated by idiot drunk. Facilitated by the United States, by idiot drunk Gorbachev and the counter-revolutionary Yeltsin, and of course, who was also there supporting that was the current Russian president now, Putin. And so once they break up, they overthrow the Soviet Union. They break it up. They put down the protests that are calling for it to be revived. Then you have chaos in Russia, chaos in Ukraine, less so in Belarus because Lukashenko came and kept the Soviet system. But this is what led rise to Putin becoming president in the first place. There was rampant crime, the mafia, sex trafficking, drugs. Literally when capitalism was implemented, it completely destroyed all the republics. And it's something that their people still have trauma over today. And so Putin comes and he's like, well, I'm going to take Russia and make her strong again. We're going to be okay. We're going to bring down this crime and whatever have you. And he's able to do that in a way that, while he's still a capitalist, it does it in a way that gains confidence from the Russian people. So, I mean, this is part of the reason why Putin has been president for so long, is because at first he's the president that they've known since the chaos that was the most traumatic event, which was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So we'll fast forward to 1994 when Boris Yeltsin and the U.S. ambassador had sat down and created the Budapest Memorandum, which discusses that they were going to take all the Soviet nukes out of Ukraine just to make it less so that there could be 3 nuclear world powers. And it also was describing how NATO wouldn't be moving any eastward towards Russia. So NATO is going to exist, but you're not going to encroach on us. It provided protections for Ukraine and Ukrainian borders, and so have you, just a way so that they can continue on with peace afterwards. But of course, the U.S. violated this and continued to go even 600 miles closer to Russia's border, going all the way to Latvia, Estonia, all these countries that are Russia's closest neighbors, once used to be allies. And so then we can flash forward a bit again to 2013. And so before the election, there was the president then, Viktor Yanukovych, who was kind of flirting with the idea of moving away from such a high Russian influence and started working with possibly trade agreements with the EU. And he kind of ran on this campaign that, we may work with the EU, like I'm in talks with them. And so especially in the Eastern area, going backtrack a little real quick for a second, but the eastern area, which includes Donetsk and Lugansk, but it's known as Donbass, has historically been ethnically Russian, very proud of their communist history. It was very pro-communist, and this is told by its electoral history, very pro-Yanukovych, and they never wanted to be a part of Ukraine, even going back as far as 1922. And they had, there's a little history there with the people there that had disagreements with Lenin because they were given as a part of Ukraine as a compromise, but they never historically wanted to be Ukrainian. They never felt Ukrainian, but it was made as a compromise when they were creating the Ukrainian state, which, by the way, never existed before the Soviet Union. Of course, the Ukrainian Slavic, Eastern Slavic people existed. No one's saying they didn't exist, but the Ukrainian state never existed before the Soviet Union. So this eastern area overwhelmingly supported Viktor Yanukovych in the 2013-2014 election, but for like 90%. And in the other areas, it was low, especially Western Ukraine, where we see the Banderaites now, was always very fascistic, very nationalistic, I would say, extremely nationalistic. And at this point now, it's bordering Poland, who's having their own fascist problem already. And so there's this, it was always very clear in Ukraine that there was a regional divide. The West is very Ukrainian nationalistic, they speak Ukrainian, whereas the East is more Russian ethnically. They speak Russian, they don't know Ukrainian, or they don't know it well. And so there's that regional conflict. So once he's elected as president, this trade somehow falls through with the EU, and he says, you know what, we're not going to be working with the EU, we're just going to continue working with Russia, who at this point was Ukraine's largest trading partner. And that's where you commence Euromaidan, which started in February of 2014, I want to say. And it was a bunch of petite bourgeois students, all those Western funded NGOs and civil society groups, basically NED puppets, CIA puppets. They started to come out and protest the decision. And this is where it gets its name Euromaidan, because they wanted Ukraine to move to Europe and not be Russian. And this is where you also see the Ukrainian Nazis start to come out too, because one, they have an interest in taking over the Ukrainian state, but also they consider themselves European, and the Russians, the Asiatic colonizers, the Mongols. They reflect on their history, a part of Kievan Rus, and when the Kievan Rus was overtaken by the Mongols twice, Kiev was burned down by the Mongols. So they're very reminiscent on the Russians are not us. We have nothing to do with Russians, which is not true. They all descend from the same Eastern Slavic tribes. And we are Europeans. We are better. We are white people, which is funny because funny, but not funny. But, Hitler wanted to exterminate the Slavs, and, Ukrainian Nazis don't get that they are still Slavs,
Right.
even if they look like Germans. They're still Slavic, because that's how fucking weird racism is, or ethnicism, whatever. So they go out and they start protesting, and it starts getting violent. They have like trained fascist military groups that are starting to attack the Ukrainian police and the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian army then, escalates and fights back, because of course no state is going to just sit back and watch someone to try to take it over. Whether we like the state or not, we always know that the state is going to push back. And because of that, that's where you start to see more violence break out. Students are getting killed, and now this causes international hysteria. You've got European observers going in. You've got Victoria Nuland giving out cookies to the Nazis and saying, yeah, like, how can you imagine a U.S. diplomat, a U.S. Official going to another country and handing out cookies to protesters? Like, that is so hostile.
And also
But
John McCain too. Remember, he was up there.
John McCain was like John McCain, Joe Biden. I mean, this was the bipartisan event. Was we're taking Ukraine, and it's going to be our bitch. And so, through this violent uprising, they were eventually, I believe it was in March, that they were able to fully take over the Ukrainian state, and Yanukovych resigned and fled to Russia. And the fascists took over. The fascists were installed and handpicked, and this is where you see the entering of Petro Poroshenko, who was a Ukrainian oligarch, become president, and a fascist oligarch become president. Now, at this time, Crimea, which was also part of Russia for 240 years. I mean, the Russians fought like hell for Crimea. They fucking destroyed the Ottomans, said, we want Crimea. Why? Because Crimea was Russia's access to the sea. It's Russia's access to Europe. Because the only other waterway that Russia has access to is, you know, I think the Baltic Sea and the Pacific Ocean in its far east, but it's not really useful for them. But having Crimea makes it useful for them. So when in 1954, Khrushchev gave Crimea to Ukraine, and you know he was Ukrainian, he was like, "Oh, my gift, my motherland, or whatever." And at that point, it's, you know, not too much of a big deal because at the end of the day, they're both still in the same Soviet Socialist Republic. They're under the same government, so okay, that was fine. But now that you have a government, and by the way, Crimea is like over 60% Russian, ethnically Russian. They speak Russian. They, you know, Ukrainian nationality, but they are ethnically Russian. So once you see at this point a fascist regime that is anti-Russian, wants to take away Russian as a national language, oppress ethnic Russians, Crimea sees this and says, at this point, it's an autonomous region of Ukraine and is not a full region of Ukraine. So they say, yeah, maybe we should consider whether we're going to be part of and Ukraine says, we want you as a region. It's not just that you can stay in rock. You're going to, because it's a nationalist project. Ukraine is a far right nationalist project. We need you part of the state. You don't get to be halfway through. So they take it to a vote and they say, are we going to join the Russian Federation or are we going to fully join Ukraine? And overwhelmingly, with 89% of voter turnout and 94% of the vote went towards joining Russia. And Russia, of course, has every interest to annex Crimea. Of course, it's their only access to the sea. It's their access to the rest of the world. Of course, they're going to see Crimea. I mean, Catherine the Great had them destroy the Ottomans for a reason over this. They're not letting that go. So Russia absolutely said that they were going to annex Crimea, and whether we like it or not, it was still
but didn't the people vote for it?
Well, that's the thing. At the end of the day, with whether it's Russia's interest or not, this is something that the Crimean people wanted. It was
Right.
this was their self-determination as ethnic Russian people in the face of a fascist government that talks about ethnically cleansing them because of their ethnic origin. They don't feel safe in part of the Ukrainian state. They don't want to be Ukrainian. The majority of them don't want to be part of the Ukrainian state if this is what the Ukrainian state is going to be. So it makes more sense for them to go to Russia. And so that's what the question of Crimea, and Russia is more than willing to accept them because of their material interest in it. But that's the case of Crimea. Then we have after Crimea, that was an inspiration for the people of Donbass, who I've already told you have always been very separatist in their sentiments, have never really felt fully Ukrainian in their sentiments from the beginning of the creation of the Ukrainian state. And they see this and they say, well, we want to do that too. We want to hold our own elections. So whether we're going to leave Ukraine. And Putin says, we're not going to annex you like we annexed Crimea. So you should have peace talks with this new government. We're not going to annex you. And they say, you're not going to annex us? Fuck that. Then we'll be independent because we're not going to talk with this government. And so on May 11th, both in Lugansk and in Donetsk, they voted, and I want to say it was like a 70% average. I don't know the exact number, but around 70%, 70 to 80% average that they voted to become independent. And they said, we will be independent until that fascist regime in Kiev resigns. And that's when the civil war breaks out. So for the past 8 years, Ukraine has not been at war with Russia. I remember one of my Ukrainian coworkers, he said to me, Kayla, could you talk about Russia when you know that my country's at war with them? And I was like, Vitaly, if your country was at war with Russia, it wouldn't be going on for this long. It would have ended a half hour ago. Because it's true, they could not. The Ukrainian army is fighting a small ragtag separatist army that is, yes, getting Russian weapons, but ultimately the people in the area. And it's gone on for 8 years. 8 years, and this is a ragtag army versus an army of a much larger nation, the largest country in Europe, which is what Ukraine is. So this is when the war breaks out in 2015. Well, let's just start from there. That's how everything breaks out. That's how the civil war starts. That's how the conflict starts. That's how Ukraine was created by the United States, stoking NATO, stoking those ethnic conflicts like they did in Yugoslavia, turned all of those countries against one another. This is exactly what they did to Russia and Ukraine, provoke old and fascist history. Oh, look at the Russian colonization. That's what they call This is the historical revisionism in Ukraine. This is what they teach kids, that they were colonized by the Russians, and that was what the Soviet Union was, Russian
Right.
colonization. And so you stoke the flames of these fires, you turn people that have ancestral history together. They have the same ancestors, they come from the same tribes, they've had a similar brotherhood of a history. You turn them against each other and say, Russia's the enemy, us, the West, who were trying to destroy you when you were in the Soviet Union, we're your friends, come join us and we're going to make you great. And what ends up happening is that Ukraine has a civil war where there's mass immigration out of the country, which nobody talks about.
No one, no one.
Nobody talks about. We want to talk about Venezuelans' immigration crisis all day, but Ukraine is like double of that, because there's compulsory military for boys who are not studying over the age of 18, and they don't want to go to war to fight their own brothers. So millions of Ukrainians have been pouring into Europe as cheap workers, being treated like shit in Poland. And then those that can come to the United States or, the UK or Canada, they come here fleeing war, fleeing compulsory military service. They're the poorest country. They've got a mass immigration out. Their economy starts to plummet. They've lost their largest trading partner. So it's what has the West really done for Ukraine except ruin them, and put in fascists in power?
I love that there's like receipts of the like US activity on the National Endowment for Democracy website, and you can see how much money they've spent into these NGOs and to it literally says we're spending this money to influence public policy in the private sector. It's right there. It's right there. They're literally saying we are making Ukraine a money laundering state.
Yeah.
And it's right there. It's right there. You tell people that, you tell people this is the CIA working here, and they don't know what to do with that information. I don't even know what to do with that information. Trying to talk about that is quite exhausting, because nobody wants to listen to it. Nobody wants to listen to that. What was it, last month? Russia took 40,000 refugees from Ukraine. Russia. They went to Russia. They didn't go to Kiev. They went to Russia. Why does that matter, Kayla? Why does that matter that they went to Russia, not Kiev?
I mean, it shows that they're not safe in Ukraine, and Ukraine is not their safe harbor. There's Ukrainians who live in Kiev who are trying to leave Kiev, and this is before these recent attacks. They've been trying to leave Kiev, that they've had a mass exodus out of their country. They're going into Russia because, first of all, there's more economic promise in Russia. Not acting like Russia's the greatest country in the world, because it's not, but it's certainly not in the position that the United States has put Kiev in, or Ukraine in. It's not that.
Right. And it's just, this is why it's very frustrating when we see just constantly just like people just thinking that all this started like a few days ago because Putin all of a sudden just wanted to invade Ukraine as a land grab, instead of actually, the people of these independent states, they asked Putin to come in to protect them from these like fascist attacks, that the shelling that's been going on from Kiev over the past 8 years, which the Minsk agreement, people don't really talk about how how Kiev is in violation of that agreement by continuing to kill all these people. Over I think like 14,000 people have died over the past 8 years because of the government that we've installed in Ukraine. But now people want to pretend that Putin is the bad guy because he is actually doing what he's been asked to do and protect people who are being killed by their own government. And it's just really mind-boggling to see that. I
want to say this. So I first found out about Ukraine and the Donbas situation. So I'll tell you, my first love was Romania. I've been in love with Eastern Europe since I was 9 years old. I started learning Dragostelinte, and I was just like, I want to go to Eastern Europe. But when I was 19, I first started seriously studying Marxism, and just by a way of things, I got into learning about the situation in Ukraine. Now that started off when I was 16, so I learned about it 3 years after it happened, after the Civil War started, after Crimea left. And this is where I started to develop my understanding of anti-imperialism and what the United States has done to not only just people in Latin America, that is my heritage, but also people in Eastern Europe. And so I've been studying the situation in Donetsk and Lugansk and Crimea for about, what year are we in now? How old am I? For about 5 years now. And yeah, I lost track of my age. For about 5 years now. And that's not, I'm not acting like I'm the savior or anything, but I'm just seeing how all the people who are talking about how, oh, both sides are bad, or how we should also condemn Putin. Where the fuck have you been for the past 8 years while the
Right.
people in Donbass were getting slaughtered? While 14,000 people have been getting slaughtered by the Ukrainian army after the Minsk agreement. It's been 7 years since the Minsk agreement, and they've been still getting killed. This has caused a refugee crisis of 2.7 million people out of Donbass. I have friends who are refugees from Donbass. I was with them in Kiev, and one of them lives here in Brooklyn. They can't go to their homelands. Where the fuck have you people been wanting to talk about both sides are bad? Well, okay, where have you been when these people were getting genocided by the Ukrainian army? Because it seems like you're really talking about one side and not the other. I'm sorry that you think that people in Donbass and Donetsk and Lugansk, that their lives don't matter more than some Ukrainian military fields and some aircrafts. Okay, this situation has gone on far too long, and there's been so many attempts that Putin has had in 8 years. It only took them less than 24 hours to really make substantial damage
Well,
to the Ukrainian army,
well,
and it waited 8 years to do that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but like if Putin was like all about going to war, he would have done this 8 years ago.
He could have done this from the
He could have done
beginning
this
and
8 years ago, but he
quashed it.
wanted peace. He wanted to give peace he wanted to do it in a peaceful way. But this is it. This is that now they asked for it, and now he's been asked to come in. He's doing what he's supposed to do, and you want to condemn Putin and make him and compare him to Hitler when he's actually fighting Hitler,
People who actually hail
loving
Hitler.
the people who actually like love Hitler. How is he
Didn't even
Hitler
Hitler.
right now?
Yeah.
He's saving people from the Nazis. It's just crazy how they compare him to that still, and
The
it's like,
world has ignored the people of Donbass. And what's even more sad is not to say that while the Ukrainian state, I have no sympathy for the Ukrainian state. I do have sympathy for the Ukrainian people. I have sympathy for the working class Ukrainian people that have been held hostage by this US-backed dictatorship, this fascist dictatorship that they didn't fucking vote for. Okay, Ukraine is not a democracy. They're not allowed to run in elections. The Communist Party has been banned. Leftists have been exiled. Anybody that criticizes the government is considered pro-Russian and gets either jailed, silenced. There's no independent media. Ukraine is a fascist dictatorship.
Everything they accuse Russia of doing,
They're doing.
everything.
doing. And
every single time. There's the double standards are just so glaring. Like you can't. How can you?
It's hypocrisy. It's blatant hypocrisy.
I've seen Zelensky telling people to like fight with Molotov cocktails.
Oh, and then handing people guns, like civilians, so they want people to be cannon fodder.
And that's the thing. That just goes to show exactly. It goes to show the lack of. But
then people here in the United States, like these liberals, like they get it from the media, and they think it's like, oh wow, these people, wow, they're really fighting for they make it like like a touching story, like wow, these people really are really
poor
fighting
victims,
for their life.
fighting from Russia. They really they're poor victims from their own country that's sending them to die, leaving them.
That's disgusting. Can you imagine can you imagine if Putin started doing that, like giving civilians guns? They
criticize Stalin for it all the time during the Great Patriotic War. Oh, he sent so many people to die. He sent so many people to die. But yet you don't see the Ukrainian state sending its own people to die in a war that they knew that they couldn't protect themselves in, stoking the flames of fire. Did you know that months ago Ukraine called Zelensky called an offensive, stating that they were going to take back Crimea? They put on Ukrainian troops along on the border of Crimea and started an offensive attacking Donbass. Literally, he started this thing. He started it, and to say that it's not what we want. It's not that we wanted Russia to go and bomb things and go and cause. It's not what we wanted, but it was like the people of Donbass specifically asked Russia to help us. We are getting slaughtered. We have been getting slaughtered for the past 8 years. We need help. And the fact of the matter is, like, first of all, there's so much disinformation. People are saying, oh, well, Russia's committing actual war crimes now, when really the Ukrainian state government has been committing war crimes, but a lot of these things are just unverified, uh, completely. Like, I know Radio Free Europe sent posted a video of something that happened in Syria in 2018, and they were like, this just happened in Ukraine. I was telling you guys the story earlier where my own partner, he was watching videos on people's story, and two of the videos had different audios, and then he sent it to me, and I had actually seen the video 3 days ago, but they were saying it happened that morning. There's so much misinformation being shared by Western media, and online on all these spaces, and so really deciding what's true and what's not. But the fact of the matter is, the Russian army is committed to demilitarizing, destabilizing the Ukrainian state, and they've said themselves, as well as the Chechens who have volunteered, that they're out to take out Ukraine's Nazis. That
Right.
is the objective, to take out the Ukraine's Nazis. And it should also be mentioned that the Ukrainian state and the Ukraine Nazis are using their people as
Cannon
covers,
fodder.
as shields, yes, cannon fodder,
Yeah.
cannon fodder, and it's fucked up, dude. It's fucked up, and then it's just fucked up.
Yeah, I know. And then so yeah, so then that's been going on in Donbass for the past 8 years. And and then people want to criticize Putin for not wanting Ukraine to have nuclear weapons and join NATO. And people think here, like liberals think, that NATO is this like great organization that like goes around and like brings peace everywhere, and they don't understand the history of NATO and how it was created and how it was like filled with Nazis from World War II. Why don't you talk about that a little bit, like what NATO is and why Ukraine joining NATO would be a threat, and also them having nuclear weapons? Like people think that Putin is being a bully. Like that's like the conversation I have with people, like Putin's being a bully because he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO and have nuclear weapons, and he's somehow just he wants to take advantage of the situation and do a land grab, including Poland, not just Ukraine.
The Polish are always, oh my gosh, don't even get me
It's
started on the
crazy.
Polish.
It's crazy. It's
Don't
crazy.
start on the Polish. I know you're in Chicago, and that must be something. Luckily not too much here, but anyway, so yeah, a lot of the arguments that I'm hearing right now is they don't want us to join NATO, but we're a sovereign nation. We should be allowed to join NATO. Well,
You're
what is
not.
NATO? Well, first of all, yeah, right.
But first of all, you're not a sovereign.
You're not a sovereign nation. You're a
because you
U.S.
just had a
puppet.
coup. You just got overthrown by the United States. How's that sovereign?
Yeah, that's not a democratically elected state. No.
No.
But what is NATO? So NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization,
The North American Treaty Organization.
It might as well be.
It might as well be. Yeah,
let's
it might
be
as well
honest.
be.
Sorry, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that was created specifically by the United States and the former the old imperial powers, to completely exist to counter Soviet aggression. And so in response, the Soviet Union and their Eastern allied countries that were also socialists, like Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, yada, yada, they formed the Warsaw Pact to counter NATO aggression. But NATO came first, right? They said, we're creating an alliance to attack this one country. That's literally like you go on the NATO's website. I was on the NATO's website the other day. I don't know, just reading some stuff. And that's literally, they say that they recognize that as part of their history. We existed to counter Soviet aggression. So you would think that after 1991, now that the Soviet Union has been overthrown, it's been dissolved through a coup, you would think that there's no need for NATO, right? So at that point, NATO has 12 countries. So the Soviet Union's gone. You exist to counter Soviet aggression. Now there is no Soviet aggression. But instead of dissolving, because now its purpose doesn't exist anymore, right? It starts increasing in numbers. It starts adding members. And so, like we said earlier in the Budapest Memorandum, the literal agreement that Russia and the United States, Boris Yeltsin and the United States ambassador made together in 1994 was that they would not move forward eastward, and that there would absolutely be no NATO countries on the Russian border. Well, obviously now that's not happening anymore. And the United States and with its NATO partners have actually expanded from 12 countries to 30 countries, 600 miles closer to the Russian border. So obviously they've broken this international agreement, the Budapest Memorandum. They violated their promise, and so Ukraine to say that, well, we're a sovereign nation, we should be allowed to join NATO if we want to. Well, there's literally international agreements that bar you from it, and you were at the talking table and you were barred from joining NATO. That's just the fact. This is a terrorist alliance that has unleashed havoc everywhere in the world. Literally, Ukraine is like, we're a sovereign nation. We should be allowed to commit terrorism too. We should go and destroy Libya and Yemen and Syria. We should go and try to overthrow governments all over the world too. That's our right as a sovereign nation, is to infringe on the rights of other sovereign nations. Okay, Ukraine. Yeah, I totally support your message. No, fuck that. And so, Russia, this alliance, and Russia's actually tried to join NATO a couple of times too and was always rejected, because it literally exists to counter countries like Russia. Russia has every reason to see NATO as a major security threat. This is not the first time, this won't be the last time that the United States has tried to mess with Russia. I mean, we were almost on the brink of nuclear war, if we remember, with the Cuban Missile Crisis. So Russia knows in its history very well that the United States is not to be trusted, and the United States is very much interested, as it has always been, even before the Soviet Union, has always been in, subjugating Russia. And Russia is a beast that cannot be subjugated by the United States, no matter how bad, no matter how powerful the U.S. empire is. Russia has never been able to be completely subjugated by the United States. And they've stood strong, they've resisted, and thankfully for the Soviet times, they were able to do that. And so, everyone wants to talk about how, well, Ukraine is a sovereign country and it should be allowed to join NATO, but there's literally international agreements that bar them from doing that, because it is a terrorist organization. That's like saying me going out and saying I should have the right to join ISIS. That is my God-given right. No, fuck you.
I sorry, Eric, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I am still like baffled at this like Crimea thing and people just asserting that it's illegal. Why do they say that? Why are they wrong? Why does the Donbass region have the right to self-determination versus being part of Ukraine? And how do we talk to people about this?
It is a little difficult to talk about. So a couple of arguments that I get when it comes to Crimea is the first one being that, well, the elections were fake. The elections were fake, and that they were really controlled by Russia. And with people like that, you could tell them that the sky is blue, but if they don't like the color blue, they're going to tell you no. It doesn't matter.
Right.
They don't like Russia. They've already decided that Russia is the enemy. So there's really, no arguing with people. They're like, okay, well, this country was, at this moment, it was still under the, Ukrainian constitution. So if you're saying that it was fake, well, then you're saying that the Ukrainian system that they were under was probably fake. And then there's other people who say, well, this is illegal because in the Budapest Memorandum, it also says that the Ukraine's borders will still be protected. So Ukraine gets its nukes out, but you still have to respect Ukraine's borders. But the thing about Crimea is that although it was like, this autonomous region in Ukraine, like Chechnya is an autonomous region in Russia, it's still an autonomous region. Autonomous, what does that mean? That word, autonomy, it has the own right to, make its decisions for itself. And so as an autonomous region, they decided to join the Russian Federation for the sake of their lives. Because again, we're talking about a government that's talking about ethnically cleansing them. Like, I don't want to make the comparison to, other oppressed groups, but it's like if there's a group of people who are under a government that, there's people who want to genocide them because of their ethnicity, I think they have the right to say, no, I'm leaving, we're leaving.
Right.
And especially in such a concentrated area like Crimea, which again has historical ties to Russia because it was part of the Russian Empire for 240 years. Russia was, very much valued Crimea. And, Sevastopol is also named as a hero city. This is a very, very historic, very powerful, very integral city in, Soviet history and Russian history. And they have every right to choose that they don't want to be genocided. They don't want to be under the boot of a government that doesn't like them, doesn't think that people like them should exist, they shouldn't speak their language, and wants them, to stomp them out of who they are into something else. Just like we can say that the Ukrainian identity, the Ukrainian nationality should be respected, right? Ukrainians should have the right to have their language schools and speak their language and be Ukrainian. Crimeans have the right to be Crimeans, and Crimeans have the right to, if they want to be part of the Russian Empire, to be Russian Empire. Sorry, if they want to be part of Russia, they didn't want to. I don't know if they wanted to be part of the Russian Empire. Who knows? We'll have to ask the Ottomans. But that they want to be part of Russian Federation, then that's their right as people who believe in self-determination of all oppressed peoples.
Yeah. Well, who didn't get a choice to self-determination? The Golan Heights in Syria. Israel took it over.
It was just taken.
No one talks about that. No one talks about no one in the US talks about how that's criminal. No one talks about all the land grabs the United States does in
the entire state of Israel.
Yeah, I mean,
they don't talk about.
Right, the entire state of Israel is an occupation. What we did in Iraq and continue to do all over the world. Puerto Rico, that's occupation. Hawaii.
Can we talk about how Saudi Arabia bombed the shit out of Yemen yesterday or the day before too?
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Saudi Arabia has been leading this coalition with the United States support and funding.
Right, and we're occupying Syria. We're occupying Syria. But then they think Putin's just going to come in and start doing land grabs like the United States. That's what the United States does, not Putin. Look what happened in Kazakhstan. They came in, did what they had to do, and they left.
And they left. And as they were called by the Kazakhstani government. Right.
So it's all hypocrisy. What we're seeing, we're all seeing projection and hypocrisy from people from the West, especially the media, who's funded by the military-industrial complex and big oil, because they have an interest in keeping Russia down. Because if Nord Stream 2 ever gets up and running, that would bring down oil and gas prices.
And it would totally nullify NATO. It would totally nullify NATO, because if Europe's dependent on Russian gas, 80% is what I've read. 80%. Now that's a huge number. If Europe gets 80% of its energy from Russia,
I think it's 40.
No, with that pipeline, with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline,
with the pipeline.
It's 80%, and that then the US can't rely on NATO to go to war with Russia, and then they're further isolating themselves. I mean, the US it's a wounded dog right now, like baring its teeth, and it's not gonna they're not winning. They're not gonna
win. I keep saying this quote. I'm like, a dying dog bites. No, it's a wounded dog baring its teeth. That's exactly what I've been trying to say. Right. It's exactly what it is, though. And the sad fact of it all is that it's, again, the Ukrainian people that are going to have to suffer with this. It's the people of Donbass. Like we said earlier in the beginning of this conversation, that the problems did not start yesterday, a few months ago. The problems did not start because Putin woke up and said, you know what, I'm just in a silly mood. Let me go take over Ukraine. The problem started because of a U.S. fascist-backed coup that happened in 2014. The coup who put in these regime dictators that, first, I want to stress that Ukraine is not a democracy. There are millions of Ukrainians in exile, political exile. They don't have independent media. They're not allowed to run in parties if you're in elections, if you're a leftist, if you criticize the government because you're pro-Russian. I want us to understand the depth of how they're who the Ukrainian government is, who is in power, who is allowed to speak, what media is allowed to say things. This has also shaped the way the Ukrainian people who were raised under historical revisionism understand their own reality. You know, and what I think is very interesting too, especially when you're in the US context, is when you talk to a Russian, you can talk to a Russian who's like, oh, I don't like Putin, I hate my government. When you talk to someone from the United States, you could say, oh, I don't like the United States, I hate my government. But it's never like you saying that you hate my government, someone saying that they hate my government. I'm like, I hate my government too. You could talk to a Russian all day about how Putin is bad, and they'll be like, yeah, I hate him too. But with the Ukrainian, you cannot do that, because with the Ukrainian, when you start criticizing their government, they start feeling it as the personal attack upon them, because Ukraine is a fascist state, and it has created this idea of like just like the German fascist state, you are nothing, you are the state. The Ukrainian nationality is one with the state. The state is everything. That is what a fascist government does, and that is what the fascist government of Ukraine has done. So it's hard to have these conversations too with people from Ukraine, well-meaning people, good people who are not fascists, but have been raised under historical revisionism, have been so brainwashed. You start to criticize the Ukrainian state, where a lot of the Ukrainian diaspora here, and they see that as an attack on the Ukrainian identity. But it's something that and I feel like I can speak for all of us here when we say that we want nothing but the best for Ukrainian people, and we understand that that is only possible and had happened under socialism. We don't want war between these people. We want this fascist dictatorship out. We want peace and socialism and solidarity between all peoples of the world. But the reality is that the Ukrainian state, as it exists now, is a fascist state that has been, fanning the fumes of war. The United States has been giving it fuel to go to war, go to war, go to war. And this is all the result of that. And so, not to say that maybe one day Putin will be our enemy. At the end of the day, he's still a capitalist. But today, here in this moment, he is not our enemy. He is part of the anti-fascist alliance that exists in the world. There's a fascist uprising happening all over Europe, and it's starting right now in Ukraine. And hopefully it dies there.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave it. Kayla, thank you so much for joining us. Before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to say? Fox as well.
Yeah, I just want to add, because I know everything. If Ukraine is so fascist, why is Zelensky a Joe?
It's that if the United States can't be racist because we had Barack Obama.
Right.
There's no racism in this country.
I know. I heard the same thing. I'm like, well, you ever heard of the Azov battalion? Like, those are Nazis. Like, he has a Nazi.
I don't know what to tell you, but there's a statue of Stepan Bandera in Ternopil, and it's literally illegal to say that Stepan Bandera is not a hero.
Right, I know. In Ukraine, and these are the and I'm like, it doesn't matter if he's Jewish. Like, look at Israel. Like, Israel's
still a fascist state. Israel's still a fascist state.
And they're supporting the Ukrainian government too. That has like Nazi battalion.
They've been training Azov battalion.
Right.
The state that's here to protect the Jews is training the Nazis. So
right, and people just don't understand Zionism and they don't know the difference between Judaism and Zionism. Right. But yeah, I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you so much, Kayla. Let people know where they can find you.
Right. So you can find me. I have a Twitter. It's Kayla Pop, like my name right here, Kayla Pop, just with another underscore. I have an Instagram, Kayla Pio Pio, and I'm also a member of the Party of Communists USA. And so we're releasing our statements soon too about our situation. But everything that I've said is very reminiscent of what the statement is going to say. And yeah, I just hope that we can really start to pay attention more to the people of Donbass and Donetsk, and understand that they are at the end of the day, the real victims of all this crisis. Not to say that any one people is more important than the other, but the Ukrainian government has been stoking the flames of these fires, driving its own people, holding its own people hostage. And so I just want to say, at the end of the day, it's always abolish NATO, no to US imperialism, and solidarnos with Donetsk y Lugansk.
Absolutely. Thank you. We look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you.